Hey guys, tonight we journey to a place where the sun is warm, the fields are golden, and everyone's pretending they haven't been rehearsing their picnic poses for weeks. You're seated, well, jostled really, inside a gently rattling carriage with wheels that have seen better cobblestones. The year is somewhere in the 18th century, and you are on your way to a highly curated countryside picnic in France. The kind of event where people don't just bring wine, they bring metaphors about wine. The carriage smells like polished walnut and a bit of lavender sachet tucked into the velvet trim. Your driver insists it keeps away flies, though it's really just to impress any peasants who might glimpse inside. A soft breeze enters through the half-cracked window, fluttering your lace cuff and reminding you that you're wearing a completely inappropriate number of layers for sitting on grass. The countryside rolls by. Lavender fields, wheat fields, occasionally a flock of sheep parting like polite townsfolk. You feel both elevated and extremely itchy. You adjust your wig, not that you need one, but it's fashionable, and fan yourself gently with a gilded fan bearing the image of a woman lounging beside an improbably cooperative goat. It was a gift, or maybe a threat. You're not sure anymore. And then, as the carriage crests a slow hill, you see it. The meadow soft and sloping, with carefully pre-cleared grass and a small stream that definitely didn't just happen to be there. It was chosen. A few figures already dot the area. Ladies in wide skirts, gentlemen pretending to help arrange blankets without wrinkling their breeches. One woman appears to be placing a baguette on a velvet pedestal. You pretend not to see it. This, after all, is not just a picnic. It's a performance. Mainstream historians agree that 18th century French aristocratic picnics were never informal. They were extensions of court behavior transplanted to the outdoors. And this meant everything was deliberate, from the route taken to the exact moment your foot touched the grass. You descend from your carriage with great effort and minimal dignity. A servant offers a hand you absolutely pretend not to need. The hem of your gown or the trim of your frock coat grazes the grass with a hiss that says, "Don't you dare stain me, you spot your host." A marquis with an unusually symmetrical mustache, gesturing at a grove of trees and saying something about the light being just so. You nod as if you understand how tree shadows enhance pâté. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some noble guests in this era brought their own grass. Yes, sod, because the natural ground was deemed too uneven for proper blanket layout. They'd have a servant roll out a cleaner, flatter patch atop the existing one. Not very earthy for a picnic, but incredibly on-brand for 18th century French sensibilities. As you approach the chosen meadow, you feel the tension in your shoulders. Should you have brought a larger parasol? Is your cheese sweating too early? Have you smiled just enough but not too much? Historians still argue whether these picnics were genuinely enjoyed or endured like a polite battle. Some say they were expressions of joie de vivre. Others suspect they were just another way to silently one-up your cousin who married into silk money. You finally locate your assigned picnic sector. Yes, sector. Each guest has an invisible but inviolable zone, marked not by signage, but by glances. You settle into your blanket, which has been pre-fluffed by someone less titled, exhale and begin to unpack. But not all the way. You must linger between each motion, as if deciding which piece of fruit best matches your aura. To your left, a woman is pretending not to look at your wine. To your right, a poet is reclining near a hedgehog. Feels symbolic. You'll decode it later, and above all this, in the rustle of leaves, the slow buzz of summer insects, and the soft flapping of ornamental fans. One message is clear. You have arrived at the picnic. Now you just have to survive it. You glance around, pretending not to compare your meadow to everyone else's. But you do. Of course you do. You spot a rival from Versailles. Her blanket suspiciously close to a copse of carefully symmetrical birches, the kind that seem planted just for framing portraits. It's clear she arrived early to claim the painter's corner, where sunlight filters through the leaves in those polite golden rays that flatter both wigs and wine. You adjust your angle ever so slightly to catch the light. Not for vanity, just for atmosphere. Selecting the perfect picnic meadow isn't a matter of chance. It's a delicate, coded dance. In 18th century France, the chosen spot wasn't merely about grass quality or view. It signified taste, rank, and inside knowledge. There were rules, whispered but strict, about where one could recline without committing botanical scandal, You unfold your hand-painted parasol and inspect the surroundings like a general surveying a battlefield. You must avoid proximity to muddy banks, ants, or, heaven forbid, a tree prone to dropping leaves in dramatic bursts. A single falling leaf could ruin the narrative of effortless beauty you're trying so hard to craft. A servant hovers nearby, quietly brushing pine needles away from the hem of your blanket. You pretend not to see him. A picnic must appear untouched by labor. The real trick, of course, is choosing a spot that feels rustic, but not too rustic. No one wants to be seen swatting flies or leaning against bark. That's for peasants. You want the idea of wildness, not the touch of it. Mainstream sources agree that aristocrats frequently picnicked in pre-curated nature. Manicured woods, soft knolls with pre-measured shade, even gardens designed to look almost natural, like nature with better manners. Your current setting was likely walked a dozen times before the event by under-butlers and junior groundsmen carrying twine and sketchbooks. You settle into your corner, adjusting your blanket one final time with a flourish that says, "I picnic regularly." Even though this is your third try today, here's a quirky fact. Some noble families in this era hired meadow consultants. Yes, consultants. Professionals who advised on the best locations for seasonal light, optimal bird noise, and even the likelihood of distant sheep bleating poetically in the background. One woman is rumored to have canceled an entire picnic because a frog croaked too loudly near the sorbet. Historians still argue whether these picnics were meant to connect the nobility to the land or to remind them how far they were from it. Some suggest that the deliberate choice of natural spots was an early form of aesthetic escapism, a way to flirt with pastoral life without ever actually enduring it. You glance toward the nearby brook. It trickles at a volume that feels tastefully composed, probably adjusted yesterday. You admire how it reflects the sky just enough to shimmer, but not enough to distract. You briefly consider writing a poem. Then you remember you left your quill in the carriage. Someone nearby plays a soft note on a flute. Just one. Just enough. You pretend not to notice but shift your posture slightly, so your profile aligns with the sound. You are now the kind of person who listens to flutes beside water. A footman delivers a cushion for your elbow, placed precisely. You wonder how many elbows this man has fluffed today. He bows, vanishes. You've done it, you've chosen correctly. And now, as the sun glows gently on your pate and the bees perform their slow-motion ballet, you begin the most important part of the ritual, waiting for someone to comment on how perfect your meadow is. The sun has settled into that golden angle where everything feels painted, and your blanket, slightly rumpled but not in a way that implies effort, catches the light like it was stitched from daylight itself. You stretch your legs beneath layers of embroidered linen and pretend not to hear someone behind you say, "Ah, of course they'd take that spot." Success. But now comes the next hurdle. The blanket. You glance downward as if seeing it for the first time, even though it's been artfully arranged by a servant in the early morning hours, when dew was still a threat and birds were uncooperative. The fabric is rich but humble, lined in tasteful gold thread, with scalloped corners so delicate you suspect they were embroidered by someone legally forbidden from blinking. In 18th century French picnic etiquette, the placement of the blanket was as loaded as the picnic basket. Too near the host and you were a sycophant. Too far and you were cold-shouldering. Too parallel and you might be signaling intimate rivalry. It was a social battlefield of angles and fringes. Mainstream historical accounts confirm that noble picnics involved meticulous attention to spacing. Your blanket couldn't touch another's, unless you were close enough to duel or marry them. Even the orientation of your seat mattered. Facing the wrong direction could be interpreted as boredom, insult, or mild treason. You shift slightly, aligning yourself diagonally with the hostess's parasol, the universal sign of, "I admire your jam, but not your gossip." Your servant discreetly tugs the corner to adjust it to an 83-degree angle. More relaxed than 90, but still respectful. The untrained I might see a rug. The informed sees a map of intentions. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some aristocrats carried personal measuring ribbons, embroidered strips with silver-threaded knots, to ensure consistent placement across different picnic settings. These ribbons were not shown, of course, but whispered about. "She's using the Bordeaux layout, you can tell by the drape." Someone might murmur over melon slices. To your left, a duchess flattens her blanket with such exaggerated gentleness, It's practically interpretive dance. A few onlookers applaud. One man bows slightly. It's unclear whether to the blanket or to her wrists. You lean back onto a goose-down cushion, marveling at how outdoor leisure has never felt more like a fencing match performed in slow motion. Historians still debate whether the obsession with blanket arrangement stemmed from genuine aesthetic preference or an anxiety-riddled need to codify status even in nature. One camp believes it's a continuation of salon etiquette. The other suspects it was a polite way to avoid touching grass. Both physically and socially, as you reach for a fig, you notice your neighbor's blanket encroaching by exactly one lace width. You glance. She glances. The corner is gently nudged back by a servant. Peace is restored. You smile and she offers you a slice of pear, the 18th century equivalent of a truce biscuit. You bite, nod approvingly. It's underripe, but socially ripe. Just as you're settling into a rhythm, a peacock strolls across the lawn with alarming entitlement. His tail feathers shimmer absurdly. Everyone freezes. Was this peacock part of someone's aesthetic strategy? A few heads turn toward the hostess. She raises a single eyebrow. Yes, it's hers. Of course it is. You sigh softly and refold your hands in your lap. You don't need a bird. You have geometry. You sit back, just enough to imply relaxation, but not so far that your posture could be interpreted as carelessness. This is the moment when people begin to really observe one another. And that means the scrutiny intensifies. Not of what you're wisely saying very little, but of what you're wearing. Welcome to the fashion minefield of 18th century picnic attire. You smooth the front of your ensemble, whether it's an embroidered muslin gown trimmed with gold-threaded ribbons or a tailored frock coat with painfully high stockings. And remember the cardinal rule of noble picnicking. You must look like you belong in a painting, even if you're slowly sinking into damp soil. Your outfit was selected days ago by a friend's stylist's valet, based on weather forecasts, recent gossip, and the emotional tone of the invitation's ink color. That's right, the darker the ink, the more formal the picnic. Yours had a slightly smudged blue-gray hue, which implied semi-improvised elegance with full expectations. Mainstream records from the 18th century show that picnic dress was an elaborate affair. Ladies in particular were known to wear open robes à la polonaise, which, despite sounding casual, involved 3 underskirts, at least 5 hidden pins, and a lifetime of regret. Gentlemen favored crisp linens, breeches cut just below the knee, and waistcoats embroidered with allegorical scenes they couldn't quite explain. You fan yourself gently, noting that someone nearby has arrived in velvet. Velvet. In July. You pretend not to notice, but you mentally note that it's the same person who brought a folding chair to a lounge-only picnic last spring. Your shoes are impractical. Of course they are. They're supposed to be. The moment anyone wears practical shoes, they are either exiled or invited to organize the servants' feast behind the hedge. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some women in this era commissioned removable grass guards, thin leather soles that strapped under their delicate shoes to protect them from mud. These were often discarded before arrival, to give the illusion of barely brushed satin. There's a rumor that Marie Antoinette once hid hers in a hollowed-out cheese wheel. Historians still debate the actual utility of such attire. Some suggest it was pure spectacle, designed to assert superiority over nature itself. Others argue it was about controlled vulnerability, the subtle theatrical risk of grass stains, wind-tossed curls, or being caught without your backup hat ribbon. You shift your gaze to a young man arranging his cravat beside a basket of apricots. He's clearly been rehearsing. His pose is pure pastoral indifference, but his every motion screams, "Please notice I practiced this in a mirror." To your right, a woman adjusts her fichu so precisely that it creates a diagonal shadow across her décolletage, flattering and modest at once. She catches your eye and gives the smallest of nods, the aristocratic equivalent of a high five. And then, the breeze picks up. A small disaster. Not a big one, your hat stays on, your hem doesn't fly, but just enough to stir the drama. Someone's ribbon unravels. Another's wig lifts half an inch. You freeze. Everyone looks at the same person, the Duchess with the feathered parasol. She doesn't blink. Instead, she lets her ribbon flutter, just a little, like a flirtatious flag. Someone sighs. Someone claps very softly. It's settled. That breeze wasn't a wardrobe malfunction, it was an artistic statement. You adjust your fan, nod in appreciation, and take another sip of wine, carefully, of course, from a goblet that matches your embroidery. This isn't just fashion, it's diplomacy in silk. A low rustle behind the hedgerow signals something important. Not danger, not scandal, but logistics. You sense it before you see it. The arrival of the real stars of any 18th century picnic. The servants. You glance casually toward the trees, where a line of quiet, efficient motion unfolds. Gloved hands unfold linen napkins the size of sails. Others bear silver trays held like relics from some culinary cult. And still more, bless them, whisk unseen crumbs from blankets without so much as a glance at the people lounging above them. You don't acknowledge any of this. To do so would be gauche. The entire illusion depends on your complete detachment. These helpers, these invisible curators of your leisure, must remain part of the scenery, like clouds or ornamental ducks. Mainstream records reveal the scale of these operations. Some noble picnics involved over 30 attendants per guest. There were bread bearers, wine pourers, shawl folders, and a position simply labeled shade monitor. The person responsible for moving a parasol without moving the person beneath it. Point one servant discreetly appears beside you and rearranges your cushion. You do not thank him. Instead, you sigh slightly, an aristocratic signal that your comfort is now acceptable. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some high-ranking households, servants were trained in hedge etiquette, the art of moving within sightlines without being seen. These weren't just footmen. They were choreographed background artists. Some even timed their movements with music to avoid visual distraction during key social moments. Today's ensemble performs admirably. From behind shrubs and trees they glide. Some pour, some pluck. One offers a porcelain plate, arm outstretched like a still life. You take a fig and nod to no one in particular. Your neighbor is fussing. Her pickled quail eggs have not arrived, and her footman is nowhere in sight. A second servant, sensing an opportunity, produces a matching jar and wordlessly hands it over. Harmony is restored. Historians still argue whether these picnics were genuinely enjoyed by their attendees or tolerated for the sake of ritual. Some accounts suggest guests developed genuine affection for the servants who orchestrated their ease. Others claim hosts often boasted about how little their guests noticed the effort. A soft clink draws your attention. Near the stream, a servant lays out a miniature folding table topped with glass domes. Inside, delicate tarts, layered and glistening, with flowers so artfully arranged they seem to have fallen there by divine accident. You briefly lock eyes with the servant placing them. Just for a moment. His expression is unreadable. There's pride there, maybe, or exhaustion, or both. And that's the thing about this whole affair. Everyone here, noble or not, is playing a role. You, reclining with a book you don't plan to read. The hostess, adjusting her seating chart mid-laugh. The servants, folding linens with such practiced precision they could be performing surgery. It's a dance, a tableau, a fleeting moment of staged leisure that depends entirely on the grace of those working silently behind the hedges. You lean back once more, sip your wine, and allow yourself to forget, for a few moments, just how much work goes into pretending nothing takes effort. You glance toward the distant tree lane where a carriage still lingers, its wheels barely turning. It's late, fashionably late, you hope, but even so, you feel a ripple of polite tension pass through the guests like a silk veil catching wind. The invitations, you see, were very clear, at least visibly clear. But in the world of 18th century French picnic etiquette, what is written is far less important than what is implied. You mentally retrace yours. Cream paper, pressed seal, gold flecks. But more telling than the calligraphy or crest was the timing. Your invitation arrived at precisely noon on a Tuesday. That alone told you everything. Noon meant of significant standing. Tuesday meant not the first to be invited, but within the second wave, which is still respectable, definitely still within reach of the good shade. You remember unfolding it and reading between every line. The phrase "a rustic affair"? Translation: do not show up in a gown made of peacock feathers. You once did. It was not well received. The closing line, a shared delight in nature and cordial company. That's picnic speak for bring your own utensils and don't talk politics. Mainstream etiquette manuals of the time were infamously ambiguous. Some noble hosts would deliberately leave their invitations vague, as a form of social test. If you really belonged, you'd know what they meant. If you didn't, well, the carriage paths are long, and the benches unforgiving. You sip your cordial, glancing at the new arrival. She steps out slowly, feathered fan in one hand, an expression of mild apology on her powdered face. She's dressed just slightly too formally. The wrong cue read from the invitation, perhaps. The others notice, of course, but everyone smiles. That's the thing. The unspoken rules are where the real drama lives. Here's a quirky tidbit. There existed, for a brief period, coded ink colors used by particularly cryptic hosts. Purple hinted at musical entertainment. Pale green implied lawn games. Red ink meant do not bring children, while black ink often meant bring wine, lots of it. One duchess reportedly received a pink-inked invite and arrived dressed for a masquerade ball. There were whispers for years. You lean slightly to the left, letting your shawl fall off your shoulder in the most controlled way possible. This signals you're relaxed, open to small talk, and definitely read the invitation correctly. A nearby baron notices. He mirrors your pose. Subtle alliances are forming. Historians still debate whether these coded invitations were a way to enforce social order or simply a means of constant amusement for bored elites. One theory suggests the ambiguity was intentional, designed to keep people just uncertain enough to stay humble. Another theory claims it was all a mistake of poor handwriting and ink shortages. You recall a picnic last summer where the invitation mentioned naturalistic improvisation. Half the guests arrived dressed as shepherds. The other half thought it was a poetry reading. A duel nearly broke out over a misunderstanding involving a grape. Today's invite, however, has created a more harmonious crowd, for the most part, except for the man with the lute who has now played the same phrase 7 times and clearly hasn't been told this isn't a rehearsal. You shift your gaze back to the meadow. Around you, guests adjust posture, fan themselves in slow syncopation, and pretend not to glance toward the hostess's canopy for cues. And you think, this whole picnic is a language. A whispered, perfumed, powdered, and paper-bound language, and every one of you is speaking it without ever opening your mouth. You hear it before you see them, the soft clatter of wheels over flattened grass, the creak of polished leather straps, the unmistakable clink of bottles gently knocking inside a carefully cushioned crate. The wine bearers have arrived. You turn your head slowly, too quickly would look eager, and spot 2 liveried servants approaching with the solemn reverence of monks delivering relics. One pushes a lacquered cart with golden wheels. The other carries a velvet-lined case, its buckles gleaming. Within moments, the area around them becomes the focal point of the entire meadow. Because here in the 18th century French picnic world, wine isn't just refreshment, it's a performance. Mainstream sources confirm that noble households often treated wine service as a dramatic ritual. Not only did the wine have to be the right vintage and provenance, it had to arrive visibly chilled, carried upright, and never ever poured too early. To sip before the flute prelude? Social suicide. The servants begin their elegant setup. The cart halts beside a white lace-draped table no one noticed before. A polished tray emerges bearing delicate crystal glasses. Not goblets, but tulip-shaped stemware designed to aerate subtle floral notes. A breeze lifts the corner of the cloth. Someone catches it just in time. That someone earns quiet admiration. You watch, entranced, as the bottles are unwrapped from their cool linen swaddling. They glisten with condensation, as if the vineyard itself is breathing gently through the glass. The servant holds one to the light, checking for clarity, perhaps, or just giving it a chance to glow. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some picnics in this period employed wine whisperers. Not sommeliers exactly, but gentlemen, and sometimes ladies, trained to describe the emotional character of a wine in poetic terms before the first sip. This one, someone whispers now, tastes like regret and early plums. Several people nod. One man clutches his chest dramatically. You accept your glass with both hands. Anything less than 2 hands feels hasty, and tilt it ever so slightly. You do not drink. Not yet. The air around you is thick with anticipation. The hostess rises, not fully, just to her knees, and raises her own glass. A pause. This is the moment. She tilts it toward the sun. A toast? No, more of a silent benediction. Only then does everyone follow. You sip. And it's good. Or maybe it isn't. Who can say? It doesn't matter. Everyone agrees it's unseasonably confident and surprisingly quiet on the back of the tongue. These phrases mean everything and nothing, but you repeat them with the conviction of someone who's once been corrected for calling champagne bubbly. Historians still argue whether such elaborate rituals were about flavor, hierarchy, or distraction. One camp believes it was a form of nonverbal ranking. Those who knew how to handle stemware could be trusted with secrets. Others think it was about controlling the tempo of the afternoon. No one misbehaves before the third pour, and now, as the wine settles warmly in your chest and conversation resumes at a silk-soft volume, you feel it. The scene is complete. Blankets, coordinated, sunlight, diffused, fans, fluttering in rhythm, and now, at last. Glasses in hand, you are no longer waiting for the picnic to begin. You're in it. Point one sip closer to scandal. Or serenity. Or sleep. You're reclining now, elbow lightly resting on a tasseled cushion. Wine glass balanced with just enough tilt to suggest you've done this before. Around you, laughter blooms in gentle waves. Not too loud. Not too sudden. Just polite ripples of mirth, like a stream giggling over stones. But then it happens. A guest approaches your blanket. You freeze internally, while maintaining the exact facial expression known as pleasant readiness. She smiles. You nod. She nods. You both pretend this interaction wasn't preceded by 15 minutes of glances and micro-adjustments. And now comes the most delicate negotiation of the picnic. Seating by social rank. In 18th century French aristocratic gatherings, where someone sat was everything. More than titles. More than fashion. Even more than who brought the best cheese. Your place on the grass, your precise location in this sea of lace and linen, communicated your status, your allegiances, and possibly your marriage prospects. Mainstream historical records show that no noble picnic ever involved random lounging. Each guest was placed implicitly or explicitly according to their place in the social lattice. The closer to the hostess's blanket, the more influence you carried. The shadier the spot, the more metaphorical your power. Sunshine was for charmers. Proximity to pastries meant trust. Your guest now faces a subtle challenge. To sit without overstepping. She pauses. You gently pat a corner of your blanket. Not the center. That would be presumptuous. But not the edge either, which might suggest you'd rather she sit somewhere nearer to, say, the hedge. She lowers herself gracefully, her gown pooling like intentional cream. She compliments your figs. You compliment her parasol. It's all very lightly coated. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some particularly elite gatherings employed invisible seating guides. Servants would scatter tiny sprigs of rosemary or thyme to indicate appropriate distances between guests. One famous countess was known to leave lavender trails to direct her preferred suitors to sit within conversational range. You glance around now and notice the entire meadow is a living map of diplomacy. To your left, a marquis pretends to read a poem aloud while inching closer to a duchess's fruit tray. She is pretending not to notice, but adjusts her cushion toward him by half a stitch. To your right, two cousins who've been in quiet feud since a misunderstanding at last year's apple tart competition are awkwardly sharing a blanket with a neutral friend and an inordinate amount of melon slices between them. Historians still argue whether these picnic formations were spontaneous or subtly enforced by hosts through invitation language and pre-picnic gossip. One theory claims the arrangements were based on salon dynamics from the previous season. Essentially, outdoor seating charts drawn from winter drawing room dramas. Your companion now leans in slightly, offering a ribbon-wrapped bundle of lemon shortbread. You accept with both hands, always with both hands, and thank her with a slow smile, implying both gratitude and superiority. She gets the message. There's no malice here. Just ballet. Social ballet on grass. You eat your shortbread delicately, avoiding crumbs on your bodice or cravat. Someone sneezes 2 blankets over and is offered a lace handkerchief by 3 separate people. It is passed like a diplomatic scroll. A servant arrives to adjust a parasol. Not yours, thankfully. You're perfectly lit. Golden from the side, shadowed beneath the chin. You wonder if you could ask for a portrait to be painted right now, but decide that might be too obvious. Instead, you settle back into your cushion and smile at the way the picnic has unfolded. A quiet pageant of position, proximity, and powdered poise. And if you've done it right, you're exactly where you should be. Not too close. Not too far, just correctly seated in the theater of leisure. A subtle rustle moves through the meadow. Not from the breeze, but from sleeves, satins, and subtle anticipation. It's time with gentle precision and feigned spontaneity. The picnic meal begins its grand unfurling. Not all at once. That would be vulgar. No, each course arrives like a guest in its own right. Admired, remarked upon, and most importantly, waited for. You reach for your first item, a delicate pastry swaddled in lace-trimmed paper. You do not bite. Not yet. First, it must be admired, held up to the light, perhaps commented on with a faint hum of interesting. Because here's the truth. 18th century French picnic food was not about nourishment. It was about narrative. Mainstream culinary historians agree that noble picnics followed a soft script of portable courses, laid out in deliberate sequence. Light fruits and sugar-glazed nibbles to open the palate, followed by crusty breads with creamy accompaniments, small savory pastries, tranches, cold meats, and then, if you had played the game well, sweets sculpted into objects of mild symbolism. You examine your basket. The layers are perfect. Lined with chilled linen, each tier reveals new wonders. A wheel of cheese stenciled with your family crest, a jar of wild berry compote sealed with a tiny wax rose, and what appears to be a carved radish in the shape of a swan. You lift the swan. It is beautiful. It is entirely inedible. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some elite gatherings, the meal was judged not by taste but by its poetic theme. A feast of winds, for example, featured only puffed or airy foods. One host famously served nothing round in a meal dedicated to angular joy. This trend, mercifully, passed quickly. Your neighbor unwraps a stack of layered egg sandwiches tied with a green ribbon. You pretend not to notice, but everyone has. Green ribbon means they came from the chef who once cooked for the queen's cousin. That chef uses goose egg. Everyone knows. Historians still argue whether these meals were actual repasts or coded displays of wealth and wit. Some suggest the delicate portions were designed to ensure no one actually became full. Because fullness, like sweat, was undignified, you taste a slice of cold duck glazed in fig syrup. It is absurdly good. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the flavor linger, then open them casually as if to say, adequate. Elsewhere, the courses continue to blossom from hampers and silk-lined crates. A footman presents a chilled custard in a crystal coupe. You accept it with all the gravity of a peace offering. And then, quite without warning, someone toasts. No warning. No preamble. Just the light tap of crystal, a brief rising, and the declaration. To grass stains, that no one shall see. Laughter bubbles. Applause follows, not for the toast itself, but for the timing. You toast, too. Not loudly. Not too late. Just as the laughter fades, and in that moment, the picnic has entered its most delicate phase. The plateau between performance and digestion. The food, now scattered in half-finished piles and elegantly nibbled remains, sits like a still life. Bees flirt with peach juice. Crumbs gather in quiet rebellion. You adjust your posture once more and wonder what's next. Because meals here are never just meals. They're openings. For secrets, flirtations, and the kind of mischief that's wrapped in linen and tied with ribbon. You lean back, carefully dabbing the corner of your mouth with a napkin embroidered in tiny violets. Probably hand-stitched by someone who's never seen a meadow. Around you, the remains of the first course glisten in the light. Fig stems, crust crumbs, a decorative sprig of mint placed by someone with excellent wrists. But now comes the true measure of your social rank. The baguette. You glance toward your basket, where your loaf waits, long and golden, its crust dusted with just the right amount of flour to suggest rusticity without poverty. You remove it slowly, gently, reverently, because this is not just bread. It is symbol. In 18th century France, bread was more than food. It was a class marker, a fashion statement, even a flirtation device. And at the picnic, the baguette's condition, presentation, and slicing technique spoke volumes. Mainstream sources agree that the nobility took their bread very seriously. Length, freshness, chewiness each had its own implications. A too soft interior? Shamefully underbaked. A cracked crust? Possible sign of emotional instability. A baguette that flaked too soon? Unmarriageable. You tear yours open with the slightest resistance. Steam curls upward like a sigh. Good. Not too warm, that would suggest rush. Not too cold, implies neglect. You catch a glance from a neighbor across the green, who is attempting a diagonal tear. Bold. You nod slightly, acknowledging the risk. Across the way, a baroness uses a knife. A knife! There's a sharp inhale from several blankets over. Scandal blooms like buttercups. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some picnickers carried bread diaries, little leather notebooks where they documented exceptional loaves, ranking them with symbols, stars, suns, or in one case, cherubic faces. One particularly notorious marquis refused to dine with anyone who brought rye unrequested. "It's not about the taste," he once said. "It's about the audacity." You break off a corner and pair it with soft cheese rolled in crushed almonds. It crunches delicately. You smile inwardly. You've made the right choice. Your bread speaks of gentle confidence and oak-aged diplomacy. Historians still argue whether the obsession with bread at picnics reflected national pride or disguised hunger among the frills. Some insist it was about anchoring luxury in a common food. Others say it was the perfect item to perform humility with without actually being humble. You glance around. Bread is being compared. Exchanged. One woman offers a heel in a fan-like gesture. Her companion declines, but only after a thoughtful pause. A tiny drama, resolved. Your own slice is receiving attention now. Someone nearby comments on its crust-to-crumb ratio. You nod solemnly, as if discussing theology. A servant refills your wine. A honeybee lands on a plate and is shooed away without panic. The sun shifts slightly, casting lace-like shadows through a parasol. The moment is perfect. And all because of a baguette. You tear another piece, smaller this time, daintier. Because now, of course, you are being watched. And everyone knows how you treat your second bite. That's the one that tells the truth. The first bite of cheese has faded. Your baguette rests like a sleepy boat in a sea of linen. And now you turn to the matter that separates seasoned picnickers from the merely enthusiastic. Cutlery. You reach into your wicker case, lined with embroidered silk, naturally, and retrieve your utensils, each wrapped in a sliver of monogrammed cloth. A fork with mother-of-pearl inlay. A knife with a carved horn handle. A spoon so small it might be confused for an ornament but is, in fact, dedicated to peach syrup only. Because in 18th century French noble society, the line between civilized and savage could be drawn with a single misplaced utensil. Mainstream etiquette of the time dictated strict rules for portable silverware protocol. Not only did one bring their own tools to outdoor affairs, they were expected to coordinate by theme, size, and occasionally poetry. Your cutlery said everything about you. Your heritage, your education, your dexterity. A mismatched fork? Unthinkable. An unengraved spoon? Barbarism. You remove your set slowly, letting the soft glint of silver catch the eye of anyone pretending not to watch. You arrange it on the blanket with geometric precision, the way one might lay out weapons before a duel. Here's your quirky tidbit. The nobility often commissioned custom picnic sets stored in velvet-lined boxes shaped like books. Some included folding forks with poetic verses engraved on the back. One particularly bold viscount once dined using a spoon that read, "For mouths that whisper treason." You glance around and immediately spot two faux pas. One guest is using a fruit knife to butter bread, chaotic. Another stabs a pear with a dessert fork. Audible gasps. You take comfort in your own alignment. Your tools gleam like loyal retainers, ready for figs, for soft meats, for pudding with soft authority. A nearby gentleman notices your arrangement. He raises his goblet in a microtoast. You respond with the smallest of nods. An entire conversation exchanged without a word. Historians still debate whether the cult of picnic silverware was about genuine refinement or overcompensation for the wild unpredictability of being outdoors. Some argue it was about reasserting control in a setting that threatened spontaneous joy. Others point out the French simply never miss an opportunity to make eating look like a small opera. Your knife slices through a berry tartlet with a sigh. The crust cracks exactly where it should. The filling remains dignified. Success. But just then, your spoon rolls sideways. Not far. Just a little nudge from the breeze. You catch it before it falls. Crisis averted. You glance up, yes, someone saw. But she smiles. Not mockingly, knowingly. Because even perfection needs the occasional tremble. Especially when it's made of silver. You're delicately retrieving a second slice of pear. A confident move, but not greedy, when something rustles. Not the usual kind of rustle. This is theatrical. Intentional. Feathers. You turn your head and there it is. A peacock. Of course. It struts across the meadow like it owns the land. Which, in a way, it probably does. Least, no doubt, from the same man who rents cloud formations for dramatic sunsets. The peacock isn't just wandering. It's performing. Tail half fanned, each step measured, gaze disapproving. Somewhere, a flutist stops mid-note. A servant pauses in the act of spooning jam. All eyes drift. Not suddenly, but in that languid, rippling way picnics prefer. Because this bird isn't wild. No. It was invited at in the opulent choreography of 18th century French picnics. Exotic animals occasionally served as living decor. Status symbols that walked, blinked, and sometimes stole a croissant. Hosts with ambitions and the correct permits included peacocks, songbirds, and on one legendary occasion a very confused raccoon. Mainstream accounts from the era described these creatures as atmospheric embellishments, the living equivalent of a flower arrangement that judges you. And the peacock? It's the centerpiece. Regal, aloof, occasionally terrifying to guests with food-colored ribbons. You watch now as the peacock circles a noblewoman's tart tray. She tenses. The tail flutters. One child whispers, "It's choosing someone." A few people laugh. But not loudly. Never loudly. Here's your quirky tidbit. At particularly fashionable picnics, trained animals were used to deliver favors or secret notes. There are documented cases of doves releasing ribbons midair, a monkey that brought poetry scrolls, and once, a swan that refused to leave and became a permanent guest. It was eventually named Bertrand. Historians still argue whether this was genuine whimsy or theatrical cruelty. Some believe the animals were a way to inject randomness into an otherwise over-curated ritual. Others see it as symbolic, nature, under velvet leash, performing for its human betters. The peacock now approaches your side of the meadow. Its eyes meet yours. You freeze. You do not blink. It's a game of picnic chicken. But you hold. And then, just as suddenly, it veers left, toward the Baroness's ribbon bouquet. She laughs, relieved, but too loudly. A ripple of disapproval passes silently through the blankets. You allow your posture to soften again. Disaster averted. You sip your wine. The peacock disappears behind a servant's cloak, as if swallowed by narrative. Someone breathes, "How poetic." Someone else murmurs, "I preferred the turtle from last month." You return to your plate. The fig waits, quiet, loyal, drama-free. And in its stillness, you feel a kind of peace. Until, of course, the next act arrives. The breeze carries a hint of something sharp and vegetal. Familiar, but unwelcome. You wrinkle your nose slightly, just enough to signal polite confusion. Then it hits you. Someone has brought onions. Not discreet chives or dainty shallots, but full-bodied, unapologetic onions. Bold and brazen in their aroma, already asserting themselves like a debutante in entirely the wrong season. You glance sideways. Who? The question ripples through the meadow in silence. No one says it, of course. That would be improper. But nostrils twitch. Eyes narrow. Because if you've learned anything on this sun-dappled field of embroidered rivalry, it's that what you bring to the picnic is not just food. It's philosophy. Mainstream records of noble picnicking etiquette include surprisingly detailed lists of banned ingredients. Garlic, onions, overly aged cheese, and certain pickled fish were blacklisted, not for their flavor, but for their scent. The prevailing wisdom? No food should overpower the perfume of the woman sitting beside you, or her lapdog. You watch as a basket nearby is discreetly repositioned upwind. A servant coughs once, just to make it known that he noticed, too. The hostess, ever vigilant, adjusts her lace cuff in a subtle sign of social correction. Everyone nods. Crisis managed. Barely. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some hosts employed aroma curators, essentially scent inspectors who reviewed baskets before they were unveiled. One infamous marquis once demanded that guests submit an inventory of their picnic items a week in advance, leading to a very public feud when a rival brought an unlisted egg tart containing invisible leeks. You reach into your own basket and remove a slice of lavender honeycomb. You hold it high enough to let the light pass through, just to remind everyone what restraint looks like. Your neighbor smiles, then offers a sprig of mint in solidarity. A quiet alliance forms. Historians still argue whether these olfactory taboos were rooted in medical theory or pure snobbery. Some believe strong-smelling foods were linked to unbalanced humors. Others suggest it was a way to control intimacy. If everyone smelled faintly of citrus and rosewater, no one's presence could become too overwhelming, and yet, as you nibble your honeycomb and sip your cordial, you find yourself secretly curious. Who did bring the onions? You imagine their basket, a daring rebellion of spice and oil. Somewhere nearby, a rogue soul is savoring a bite of forbidden allium and not caring who they offend. Bold, risky, possibly Italian. You let the thought fade. Because while rebellion is thrilling, you know the real power lies in subtlety. In scentless indulgence. In quiet judgment behind a fan. The onions will pass, but the memory, that lingers. You brush a crumb from your lap, discreetly with the back of your hand, palm down, fingers gracefully arched. Because crumbs, while inevitable, must behave as though they are not. Around you, conversation has softened into pairs and trios. Parasols tilt closer. Fans flutter with coded nuance. The real feast, it seems, is no longer on plates. It's being passed under them. This is the hour of love letters and linen naps. You glance down and, yes, there it is, folded into your napkin with geometric precision. A tiny note, wax sealed with a rose and faintly dusted with what smells like bergamot and mischief. You don't open it immediately. That would be crass. Instead, you press the seal gently between thumb and forefinger, feeling the warmth of the sender's intent still lingering in the wax. It's not about what's written. It's about how it's folded, when it arrives, and where it's hidden. In the world of 18th century French picnicking, communication thrived in margins. Mainstream accounts often overlook this, but between courses, within cushions, and beneath cutlery, guests passed more than food. They passed secrets. Napkin folding became an entire covert language. A triangle suggested an invitation. A fan fold? Flirtation. The dangerous square within a square meant, meet me at twilight under the second willow. You unfold your note carefully, rectangle, 2 folds, left curl at the corner. Message, mild intrigue, potential gossip. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some aristocrats hired professional napkin folders, not just for presentation, but for the precise folding codes they knew. These artisans could embed entire sonnets in 6 square inches of linen. One was said to be able to fold a breakup poem into the shape of a peony. You read the message slowly. It's light. A compliment about your pear slicing. A witticism about the hostess's dog, who, to be fair, is wearing a wig. You smile without moving your lips. Then you tuck the note into your reticule and adjust your posture. Just enough to show you've received it, but not enough to show from whom. Historians still debate whether these secretive exchanges were extensions of courtship or simply a way to stave off boredom while pretending not to notice the cheese cart. Either way, they became the pulse beneath the picnic, the murmur beneath the music. You observe the meadow. Elsewhere, another napkin is being unfolded. A gentleman drops a fan, intentionally. A young woman blushes in a way that suggests she very much meant to blush. The afternoon air thickens not with heat, but with possibility. And you fold your napkin again, differently this time. This one signals nothing, which, of course, makes it the most intriguing message of all. The meadow hums with gentle digestion and blossoming secrets. Spoons clink faintly against glass dishes. Someone strums a lazy chord on a lute that's only slightly out of tune, and a servant somewhere is methodically plucking dandelion fluff from a lace hem. You sigh contentedly. It's time for what many consider the true entertainment of the picnic games. But not the kind you win. No. This is the realm of games that require pretending you're not competitive. You rise gracefully, slowly, with the air of someone who might be too full for movement but shall heroically try anyway. Around you, cushions shift. Blankets are folded. Fans are tucked beneath elbows. A clearing forms in the grass, and the shuttlecocks appear like summoned spirits. Yes, shuttlecock. The preferred pastime of those wishing to appear youthful, breezy, and definitely not desperate to win that duchess's attention. It's a game of gentle arcs and softer sighs, of floating feathers and theatrically missed shots. Mainstream accounts note that during 18th century picnics, games were curated with care. Lawn activities were designed not for skill, but for style. Badminton, grace hoops, poetic recitation competitions, anything that allowed for movement with minimal effort and maximum silhouette. You take your place at the edge of the grass, wooden paddle in hand, lightly carved, ivory inlaid, possibly never used. Across from you stands a marquis in plum breeches who's adjusting his cuffs as if they contain instructions for flirting. The shuttlecock rises. You swing. You miss. By exactly the correct distance. Just enough to suggest, oh, how clumsy. But not enough to look uncoordinated. He laughs. You roll your eyes gently. The point is not the point. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some guests were known to hire grace coaches before major outdoor gatherings. Specialists who trained their clients in expressive losses, elegant recoveries, and how to trip over their own hem with flattering results. One such coach published a manual titled Falling with Charm. The shuttlecock returns. You sweat. You make contact this time, but weakly, adorably. It wobbles in the air and lands just beside a wedge of gooseberry tart. Applause. Actual applause. You curtsy, not deeply, just enough for the ruffles to ripple. Elsewhere, a couple plays a slow-motion game of bowls with candied pears. A small crowd has formed around a table where two men attempt to outrhyme each other about cheeses. The stanza "Brie begets me soft regret" earns a nod from a powdered lady nearby. Historians still argue whether these games served as entertainment or social filtration. Some claim they were ways to test character. Who can lose with grace? Who can laugh at their own footwork? Others believe it was just another layer of theater, the illusion of play layered atop the performance of leisure. You pause for water, dabbing your brow with a square of linen that matches your shoes. Across the meadow, someone fakes a stumble and lands near a bowl of sugared almonds. Someone else wins a game of whose glance lingers longest. You sit once more, victorious in nothing, and yet strangely triumphant. Because here, losing beautifully is the only way to win. The air has gone warm and still, like a velvet curtain drawn across the sky. The sun leans at a softer angle now, and you can feel it pressing gently against your eyelids. The conversation's quiet. Even the peacock, now perched near an abandoned plum tart, seems contemplative. It is the hour of the dainty nap. You adjust your position, not into a full recline, heavens no, but into that practiced art of outdoor dozing, where posture and pretense must balance delicately. You place your elbow on your cushion just so, fold one hand under your chin, and allow your lashes to lower half-mast. Never fully shut. One must remain visibly asleep, because to nap at a noble picnic is not an act of tiredness. It's a gesture of refined languor, a performance of peace. Mainstream records of the 18th century show that aristocrats treated mid-picnic napping like a spiritual discipline. No snoring, no drooling, no open-mouthed dreams about jam. The key was to resemble a portrait. Softly lit, mouth closed, slightly wistful. You let out a gentle exhale. Someone near you does the same. A footman nearby slows his pace, as though to avoid waking a dream that's only being pretended. A lute chord dies in the air. Here's your quirky tidbit. Certain noblewomen commissioned nap veils. Light gauze scarves embroidered with florals, worn over the eyes not for sleep, but to simulate it with dignity. Some were even scented, so they'd appear ethereal when the breeze lifted them. One duchess famously demanded hers be dyed to match the shade of cloud she intended to dream about. You feel your limbs grow heavy, though your spine remains appropriately aligned. There is moss beneath you. You are aware of it only as an abstract texture. A warm fly lands on your sleeve, lingers, then moves on. Even it knows this is not the time for disruption. Historians still debate the purpose of the picnic nap. Was it digestion? Flirtation dodge? A symbol of wealth so potent that even sleep could be stylized? One theory proposes it was an answer to overstimulation, a socially acceptable way to disappear while still being admired. You shift, slightly, enough to draw a blanket corner over your legs. Not for warmth but for visual balance. You are now in arrangement. And as you hover in this soft liminal state, you become aware of a distant hum, bees, or perhaps voices, half forgotten. Laughter, poetry. The low rhythm of cicadas draped across the meadow like threadbare lace. No one wakes you, no one disturbs you. Because here, sleep is not withdrawal. It is an offering. And you, wrapped in shade and silk, have given it beautifully. A soft plink rouses you. Not a shout, not a call, but the unmistakable sound of a grape being dropped with intent. You open your eyes just enough to see the trajectory. The grape bounces once, rolls across your blanket like a theatrical choice, and comes to rest beside your peach. You turn your head slowly. There he is, leaning against a tree in the dappled shade, the sender of the grape, lace at his cuff, a smirk in his eye, and a slice of watermelon poised like a prop in a comedy about desire. He raises his brows in a motion that says, "Was that playful? Or a challenge? Welcome to flirting with fans and fruit. You've arrived at the most precarious part of the noble picnic. The food has been tasted, the games played, and now the real sport begins. The art of insinuation disguised as innocent produce exchanged. In 18th century France, subtle flirtation was practically a form of statecraft. And picnics provided the perfect open-air theater for low-stakes seduction. No direct declarations, no obvious confessions, just cantaloupe cut on a diagonal and fans opened in pulses of coded emotion. Mainstream writings from the era hint at entire flirtation lexicons built on handkerchief folds, cherry stem knots, and the precise way a fig was bitten. Peach flesh left untouched. One letter warned. Signals cold heart beneath warm smile. You retrieve the grape not too quickly. You turn it in your fingers, as if inspecting for softness. Then, ever so deliberately, you set it aside. A message. Not yet. He notices. You pick up a pear instead. Slice it slowly with your dessert knife. Take a bite without breaking eye contact. A small breeze lifts the corner of your napkin like punctuation. The marquis leans forward, only to be interrupted by someone tossing a plum into a basket too forcefully. It lands with a thud. Amateur. Here's your quirky tidbit. There existed fan choreography guides that women memorized in finishing schools. Opening slowly meant interest, tapping the cheek meant disbelief, dropping the fan was basically a marriage proposal. One infamous affair reportedly began because of a fan opened at precisely the wrong time, resulting in 3 duels and 1 strawberry allergy. Your fan now rests in your lap, closed, indifferent. You sip from your cordial as though your heart has not just pirouetted out of your chest and down the hill toward the peacock. Historians still argue whether these stylized affections ever resulted in real romance. Some say it was all play, the aristocratic version of passing notes in class. Others insist these moments led to elopements, treaties, and scandals disguised as poems. Across the lawn, another flirtation has ignited over shared cherries. A lady peels her grape and places it on her companion's plate with surgical grace. He swoons. Or maybe he just has indigestion. Who's to say? You stretch just slightly, letting your shawl slip down one arm. The marquis smiles again, this time with an almost imperceptible nod. Message received. But for now, you return your gaze to the figure. Let him wonder. Because in this orchard of glances, the real fruit is the mystery. The laughter that follows is brittle and short, like a cracked meringue, sharp, too sudden for a picnic still wrapped in slow breezes and soft sighs. You sit up straighter. Something has changed. Up by the pond at the far end of the meadow, voices are rising. Not dramatically, not yet, but with that clipped tension that means someone has violated a rule. Not a legal one, of course. Much worse. A rule of decorum. You squint and see the culprits. 2 gentlemen, brothers, cousins, or former friends, it's hard to tell. Standing on opposite sides of a scattered plate of swan crumbs. Why is that? It always comes down to the swans. You adjust your parasol, pretending not to stare, though everyone is pretending not to stare, which means everyone absolutely is. The hostess tilts her head just slightly. This is her version of raising a sword. Mainstream accounts from the 18th century mention frequent outbreaks of picnic tempests. Brief, explosive quarrels over things as delicate as jam order, biscuit distribution, and, yes, who gets to feed the ornamental birds. Swans were particularly fraught. Their beauty, their status, their ability to ignore anyone without consequence made them natural symbols of passive-aggressive insult. Today's incident seems to involve a misunderstanding of portioning. One gentleman claims the bread was meant for his swan, Celestine, a sleek and notoriously moody creature. The other insists the crumbs were public property. The swan, as always, refuses to pick a side. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some noble families kept swan logs, handwritten records of which guests fed which swans, how often, and with what results. Fights over swan loyalty have been documented in both love letters and legal testimony. One particularly possessive duke once banned an entire family from his estate after their niece fed his swan an apricot. You watch now as the two men exchange formal gestures, half bows with stiff wrists. One raises a spoon as if to punctuate a monologue. The other counters with a napkin flourish. Someone claps sarcastically. A servant coughs and conveniently blocks the view with a parasol. Historians still argue whether these episodes were true disputes or carefully orchestrated moments of pique, a sort of emotional theater folded into the day's entertainment. Some claim they were essential, releasing just enough tension to keep everyone else at ease. You turn back to your own setting, now mildly electrified by the drama. Guests lean closer together. Slices of melon are offered with greater enthusiasm. A man nearby offers a toast to nonviolent crumbs. Chuckles. Ice breaks. You nod slightly, acknowledging the usefulness of the event. The host's strategy, perhaps? A staged dispute to stir the energy? Or maybe just two egos, too sun-drenched to share stale bread. Either way, the moment passes. One man retreats to his blanket, swanless but triumphant. The other is consoled by a duchess and two perfect grapes. The pond returns to its stillness. The swan glides away, utterly unbothered, and somewhere beneath your ribs, you feel it again. That strange thrill of witnessing a crisis that isn't yours. You stretch once more and reach for your own bread, carefully. The sunlight, once bright and theatrical, has softened now into gold, the kind of gold that foretells rain. You feel it before you see it. A subtle chill tiptoes across your ankles. A shadow thickens on the blanket. Someone glances skyward, their fan forgotten in one hand, the game of compliments abandoned mid-round. It's happening. The thing every picnic fears and every true picnicker must be prepared to face. Rain? Not a storm, not yet. Just the promise of one. A whisper from the clouds that all this beauty, this choreography, this curated chaos, is about to be gently, insistently undone. You do not panic. You've trained for this. Mainstream documents from the 18th century describe a full etiquette structure around inclement weather. If you stand too quickly, it's seen as alarmist. Too slowly, and you risk a damp hem and social exile. The correct response? A calm lift of the chin, a murmured observation, the breeze is turning, and the smooth gathering of non-essentials. You begin with your napkin, folded once, not crumpled. Next, your fan, closed with a soft click, like the end of a poem. Then your glass, emptied in a single, contemplative sip, because while the threat of rain was not your fault, how you handle it will be remembered. Here's your quirky tidbit. Wealthier guests often brought personal storm pages, servants trained specifically to protect hats, shoes, and silk with a kind of balletic speed. Some carried collapsible tents. Others brought blankets that doubled as rain cloaks. One eccentric count arrived each summer with a goose trained to honk at the first sign of atmospheric change. You feel the first drop land on your wrist, cool, almost polite. Around the meadow, others notice, too. A collective inhale, then a flurry of movement, still elegant but no longer idle. Parasols shift. Blankets are gathered. Plates vanish into baskets with practiced hands. Historians still debate whether this moment, the picnic undone by nature, was the true climax of the event. Some say it was when artifice cracked and reality returned. Others argue it was simply a chance to display a different kind of grace. How to exit beauty without breaking it. The hostess stands now, smiling, gesturing toward the carriages with a wave that implies she orchestrated the rain herself. Guests nod, applaud her timing, begin their slow departure. You take one last look at your corner of the meadow. Crumbs scattered like footprints, napkins askew, a fig split delicately on the grass. The scene is dissolving, but beautifully. You rise. Your shoes are still dry, your posture pristine, the rain increasing, and as you walk calmly toward the path, you pass a couple laughing beneath a shared cloak, a servant shielding a crate of lemon tarts, and one lone peacock who refuses to move, rain or no rain, that he was born for this. And, in a way, so were you. As you pass through the hedgerow, rain dusting your shoulders like stage glitter after the final act, you hear it, laughter. Not the airy, performative kind you left behind in the meadow. Not the carefully measured giggles that accompany compliments about fig arrangements or the proper method for slicing pears. No, this laughter is low, unfiltered, and honest. You peer through a gap in the foliage and glimpse a clearing just beyond the official picnic grounds. There, beneath the shelter of a loosely rigged canvas and a canopy of sighing trees, the servants are feasting, and it's marvelous that no table settings. No folded napkins, just hunks of bread torn with gusto, ripe fruit passed between friends, a slab of cheese already half devoured, and 3 people playing some sort of wildly improvised game involving cherries, a hat, and probably a rule no one intends to explain. You pause, hidden by leaves and etiquette, and watch. Because while the nobles dine with decorum, this is where the flavor lives. Mainstream histories rarely capture this parallel world, the servants' secret feast. Yet letters and private journals hint at it constantly. The meal after the meal, the party behind the hedge, where rules loosened and roles reversed. It was understood, expected, almost respected, provided it never overshadowed the performance happening out front. You see a footman with jam on his chin, a chambermaid drinking straight from the bottle with zero shame and impeccable aim. Someone toasts with a slice of meat. Someone else collapses with laughter onto a pile of blankets that look suspiciously like those meant for the Baron's third cousin. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some noble households budgeted extra delicacies for their staff's hidden picnics as a reward for flawless service. But those same households would never, ever admit it aloud. The best host simply left too much food in the wrong basket and let nature take its course. A young boy, maybe 10, maybe 12, runs past you with a cluster of grapes and a laugh that peals like a bell. He doesn't see you, or maybe he does but doesn't care. You smile. Because this is what the picnic has been holding in its seams. Real joy. Historians still argue whether these shadow feasts were tolerated out of kindness, strategy, or necessity. Some say it was guilt. Others claim it was brilliance. Happy servants mean smooth events. One letter describes a duchess who once slipped away from her own party to dance barefoot in the grass with her cook. Scandalous. Divine. You step back quietly, allowing the canvas of leaves to hide you once again. Your shoes are now damp. Your curls are frizzing at the edges. And your soul, strangely, is light, because as the noble picnic dissolves into polished departures and carriage wheels on gravel, the real celebration, the honest one, goes on just a few paces beyond the gaze of powdered noses and lacquered fans. You adjust your cloak, tuck a stray curl behind your ear, and head toward the carriages, not to leave just yet, but to give the real party its moment, unwatched, unjudged. Unfolding like a second course you never knew you needed. The carriages wait like obedient pets along the edge of the gravel path. Wheels glistening with mist, doors yawning open in synchronized boredom. A line of umbrellas, some silk, some sensible, stretch like a procession of jellyfish floating toward departure. But not for you. Not just yet. Because a new sound rolls in, neither laughter nor thunder. Music. You turn and spot them. A quartet or maybe just 3.5, depending on how strictly one defines playing. Dressed in matching cloaks of burgundy velvet with cuffs dampened by drizzle, they've set up beneath a linden tree and begun a mock symphony composed mostly of enthusiasm and half-remembered Vivaldi. The first note squeaks. The second nearly harmonizes. The third? Surprisingly moving. Welcome to the curious tradition of field music at the tail end of a noble picnic. An encore performed not for the audience, but for the atmosphere, Mainstream accounts acknowledge this as a recurring gesture of farewell. It was a final flourish, like the lace on a handkerchief or the sugar dusting on a tart. Impractical, unnecessary, and absolutely vital. The rain doesn't stop them. If anything, it adds percussion. The violist adjusts his instrument with the confidence of someone who knows at least 4 chords. The flutist plays as though serenading the trees themselves. One cellist bows with such dramatic flair that his hat falls off. No one minds. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some aristocrats viewed these performances as tests of emotional restraint. The idea was to see who could maintain composure during an off-key rendition of a court favorite. Others believed in rain harmonies, the belief that certain types of precipitation brought luck if music was played before leaving the site. You take a seat, yes, again, on a slightly damp cushion near the edge of the blanket pile. Around you, a few others pause as well. A marquise shields her violin-shaped lapdog with a parasol. A gentleman raises a goblet as if to toast the key of C minor. The music builds, then falters, then rebuilds like conversation after an awkward pause. One song gives way to another, and somewhere along the way you stop noticing whether it's good. It's something else entirely, perfectly timed imperfection. Historians still argue whether these final symphonies were commissioned or improvised. One theory suggests they were meant to disguise the awkwardness of departure. Another insists it was about signaling the event's close. As naturally as daylight fades, you, watching the flutist hit a surprisingly beautiful high note, decide it's neither. It's just ritual. A musical sigh. A way to say goodbye without the word as the last note wavers into silence. A few guests clap, softly, sincerely. A dog howls in the distance. Someone weeps, though it may just be the wind in the reeds. You rise once more, and this time, it's real. The carriages await. But the music will follow you, trailing behind like a ribbon, just a little out of tune, and somehow exactly what the moment needed. You step lightly over a puddle, just wide enough to ruin a hem, just shallow enough to tempt arrogance. You choose grace, of course. Your shoes remain spotless, though your pride wobbles a bit. The last of the picnickers trail behind you in pairs and clusters, murmuring pleasantries that sound like farewells but are actually just transitional prose. Soft phrases to bridge the shift from blanket to carriage, and then someone says it. Shall we close with a verse? You turn, slowly, because you know what's coming. The accidental poetry contest. There's always one. And always accidental. A guest, often someone with too much confidence in metaphor, quotes a line from a pastoral sonnet. Someone else counters with a rhyme. Suddenly, there are handkerchiefs waved like flags and references to dandelions, longing, and bread crusts. This time, it's a countess with a voice like vanilla and opinions on everything. She begins with, though butter softens in the heat, a lover's gaze remains discreet. A collective inhale. We are doing this. In the 18th century French picnic tradition, these poetic duels were half flirtation, half flex. Guests would casually summon couplets in honor of cheese, wind, or the silence between sighs. Those who excelled won admiration. Those who floundered, mercifully forgotten. Mainstream records note entire gatherings disrupted by poetic feuds. One marquis recited a 10-line tribute to apricots and was banned from future events for excessive confidence. Another famously rhymed vinaigrette with regret and started a scandal that lasted 3 seasons. You step forward now, not too quickly, not too eagerly. A murmur of encouragement. You offer. Beneath the elm a pear once fell, and with it, so did etiquette's spell. Laughter. A few raised brows. A servant drops a spoon in applause. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some noble guests brought rhyme cards, little note cards with pre-written lines in case they were called upon unexpectedly. One duchess commissioned a full sonnet cycle about pastry textures, written in advance by a ghostwriter she claimed was her cousin. You notice now that others are joining in. A young lord recites something vaguely about longing and lavender. A lady counters with a limerick about ham. One poem compares a crumbling tart crust to the fleeting nature of compliments. It's quite moving, really. Historians still argue whether these contests were spontaneous or carefully rehearsed. Some believe noble children were trained in casual recitation, from the age of 5. Others suspect the best poets simply had the best memory and the best wine. The Countess curtsies after her third verse. A gentleman proposes a final toast to words not meant, but well delivered. Glasses lift. Someone rhymes clover with it's over. You let that be the last line. The rain has paused, as if listening. The air, heavy with rhyme and nostalgia, folds around the moment like a satin glove. And you say nothing more, because silence, sometimes, is the most poetic thing of all. The last verse hangs in the air like perfume. Pleasant, a bit unnecessary, and destined to be misquoted by dinner. You take one final sip from your glass, now more condensation than cordial, and exhale softly. The picnickers are beginning their slow, swan-like exits, each with a practiced air of reluctance. No one wants to seem too eager to leave. Now begins one of the most underrated rituals of all. How to leave without saying goodbye. You gather your things slowly. No rush. A measured pace that communicates you're being pulled away by duty, not disinterest. You fold your shawl so gently that someone watching might think it holds a secret in 18th century French aristocratic circles. Departure was a delicate art. There were rules for how to vanish, subtle, elegant, and preferably unannounced. To bid farewell to every guest would suggest neediness. To simply disappear without trace? Rude. The sweet spot, to linger long enough to be noticed, and then be gone before someone can ask if you're leaving. Mainstream etiquette guides of the era advised a method known as le départ en glissant, the gliding exit. It involved gathering items quietly, aligning yourself with a nearby movement, a carriage approaching, a servant collecting parasols, and slipping away with a slight nod to no one in particular. Eye contact was optional. You try it now, point one step back. Another, a nod to the trees, which you hope someone interprets as a goodbye. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some nobles developed signature departure cues, a particular fan closure, a repeated phrase, "Ah, but the bees grow bold," or a stretch accompanied by a comment about one's book waiting at home. One baroness became famous for leaving mid-conversation, always just after saying, "Of course, the swan would choose him." Historians still argue whether this exit etiquette was about saving time or saving face. Some suggest it was rooted in ancient court protocols where prolonged goodbyes were seen as invitations to gossip. Others think it simply matched the aesthetic of a life where nothing was ever too loud, including farewells. You're nearly to the carriages now. The sound of wheels creaking over gravel, the rustle of silk coats being adjusted, the distinct clink of last-minute biscuit exchanges. Someone calls your name, you hesitate, you turn, smile, and raise your hand in that neutral flutter that could mean anything. Thank you, goodbye, or yes, I took the last pair, and no, I'm not sorry, they wave back. Perfect. You step into your carriage just as another raindrop falls. The driver adjusts his coat, the horses twitch slightly, and you sit back into the velvet seat with a breath that tastes like tart, mint, and a hint of scandal, and just like that, you're gone. Not too soon. Not too late. Exactly when you meant to. The interior of the carriage smells like damp wood and violet powder. Soft, lived in, and slightly sweet, like a secret too old to whisper. You feel the cushions sigh beneath you as the wheels jolt gently into motion. The rain has begun in earnest now, rhythmic and delicate, like applause muffled by lace gloves. But before the clatter of hooves fades entirely, there is one last duty. Packing the leftovers, you glance across from you, where your picnic basket waits. No longer pristine, but nobly disheveled, like a general returning from battle. Inside, crumbled tarts, half-wrapped cheese, 2 remaining pears, 1 questionable, and a bread heel so artfully uneaten it deserves framing in the 18th century. Nobles never left a feast behind, even a soggy one. Leftovers were curated, not discarded. The art of packing the remains was as ritualized as laying them out. Everything had to return home in better order than it had arrived. A disorganized basket? Scandalous. A smudged label? Social suicide. You adjust the linen lining, brush off a wayward cherry stem, and begin the reverse process of the day. Ribboning jars closed, wrapping silverware with tight spirals of cloth, tying knots that say, "I may have eaten figs with my fingers, but I know how to restore dignity." Mainstream etiquette dictated that even crumbs had a place. Some guests traveled with miniature scrap boxes, which held small portions of abandoned delicacies to be delivered to pets, servants, or, in one infamous case, a parrot named Cardinal Richelieu. Here's your quirky tidbit. It was common to include a basket note tucked atop the packed items, a short message to your future self or household staff. Something like, "The melon was successful," or, "Do not trust the raspberry tart from the Baron." These notes were sometimes collected into personal culinary diaries. You examine your own contents now, checking off an unspoken list. Wine bottle recorked? Check. A gooseberry compote sealed? Check. A spoons accounted for? Only 3, but you suspect the 4th fled with someone's poetry. You fold your napkin, the one that held that grape-sized flirtation earlier, and place it gently atop the rest. You don't reread the secret note still tucked within it. Not yet. Maybe later, with tea. Historians still argue whether this fastidious wrapping was out of practicality or theatrical control. One theory claims it was a form of ritualized closure, allowing guests to feel they had participated in something entirely meaningful, even if their only contribution was not spilling jam on their britches. The carriage rounds a bend. Rain taps more insistently on the roof. You glance out, watching the meadow recede behind trees. Now just a blur of green and white, like a half-remembered song. Your basket is now closed, secure, tidied at a perfect ending. Because in a world where fig slices mean favor and peacock glances can ruin reputations, what you take away is just as telling as what you brought. The road narrows, winding past hedgerows heavy with rain and the occasional startled pheasant. Your carriage creaks like a polite old man, each bump a whisper beneath your velvet-cushioned seat. And outside your window, the long walk back to carriage row plays again. This time, in reverse, you lean closer to the glass, fog misting its edges, and you catch glimpses of the other guests. Silhouettes ducking beneath parasols, hems hoisted above puddles, shoes sacrificed to the mud gods of rural elegance, yes. The great post-picnic exodus in 18th century France. The journey from picnic site to carriage was both symbolic and logistical. It marked the transition from the cultivated leisure of the meadow to the structured obligations of society. And, as always, what happened during this transition spoke volumes. Mainstream accounts describe it well. The guest who overtalks the entire walk back? Social climber. The one who lingers too long among the cushions, waiting to be noticed? Romantic. The one who quietly helps gather umbrellas while pretending not to? Dangerously competent. You observe one woman stopping to thank her footman for finding her left glove. Scandalous. Gratitude in public? What's next, equality? A marquis loses a shoe to the mud. A servant retrieves it with tongs. A ripple of amusement. Not mockery, amusement. The line between the two is fine, and most nobles learn to dance on it barefoot. You glance down at your own shoes, still mostly dry. How? The result of clever stepping, luck, and the unspoken truth that someone probably pre-scouted your walking route. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some nobles employed puddle preppers, servants whose job was to walk ahead and gently press down mud with planks or scatter fresh straw for delicate footwear. One particularly theatrical family had theirs dress as shepherds, claiming it added pastoral realism. As the last few guests disappear into carriages, you note their departure choreography. Cloaks drawn with flair, farewells spoken with just enough volume to be overheard by precisely the right ears. Each movement a final brushstroke on the picnic's living canvas. Historians still argue whether this ending walk was meant to reestablish social order or simply cool the heat of too much proximity. After all, picnics allowed for glances, whispers, the occasional grape-induced connection. A walk in the rain reminds everyone that romance and grass stains both fade quickly. Your carriage joins the slow procession down the tree-lined path. Wheels roll over gravel in a rhythm that matches your heartbeat. Unhurried, deliberate, done. The meadow is now behind you, and with it, the layered spectacle of a day where bread meant status, a breeze meant possibility, and silence carried the weight of 3 conversations. You exhale. Not relief. Not regret. Something softer. Something like closure. The rain begins to fade, as if even the weather knows it's time to lower the curtain. Your carriage pulls into the final curve of the estate road. wheels sighing into the gravel like they, too, have picnicked beyond their strength. The driver tips his hat through the hatch, asking with a glance whether you'd like to be dropped near the veranda or the side entrance. You choose the veranda. There's always the recap. Because a noble picnic never truly ends when the crumbs are cleared. It ends over lemon cordial and low murmurs in the drawing room, where the real conversations bloom. Debriefs, dissections, and diplomatic evaluations of the day's many mini-dramas. Your footman helps you down. The ground here is drier, the tiles cool and polished beneath your feet. You're greeted by a housemaid with a towel for your gloves, folded like origami and scented faintly of bergamot and bergamot's jealous cousin. Inside, candles are already lit. Not the dramatic chandelier kind. These are subtle tapers in brass holders, casting gentle halos across the mahogany. You take a seat on your favorite embroidered chaise, one boot off, one still politely dangling. Someone brings a glass of cordial. You sip, and you begin the ritual that every guest both dreads and delights in. The gentle post-picnic gossip. Mainstream diaries and personal letters from the 18th century tell us that noble gatherings were always followed by quiet reckoning. Moments where alliances were analyzed, flirtations ranked, and sandwiches judged in absentia. The hosts were rarely spared. In fact, being discussed was considered a success. You start with the safest target. The peacock. Very regal, you say. Almost understood meter. A friend giggles from behind her glass. Then the man with the 2 rhymes about jam. Bold, someone says. Brave, says another. Ill-advised, says a third, who had to sit beside him. Here's your quirky tidbit. Certain elite households kept picnic impression books. Hand-bound ledgers where attendees wrote anonymous notes about who stood out, who fell short, and what elements should never be repeated. Entries ranged from "her grapes were sublime" to "never allow dandelions at dessert." You mention the swan incident. A butler winces in sympathy. The crumbs. The crumbs will live in legend. Your basket sits nearby, still packed. You have no intention of unpacking it just yet. There's comfort in delay, letting the day breathe, steep like tea. Historians still debate whether these post-picnic reflections were sincere or simply extensions of the performance. Some believe they were emotional digestion. Others see them as another form of social jousting, no less fierce for being done with fans and sighs. You finish your cordial. Another arrives. Someone plays a quiet melody on the harpsichord, something slow without direction. Just notes wandering like you do now, through memories of wet grass, sticky fingers, and a stolen pair you never admitted taking. You smile, legs curled now beneath you, and for a moment you wonder, was the picnic successful? Then you remember. Success at a noble picnic isn't measured in food or flirtation. It's in who's still talking about you after the last drop of rain, and by the sound of the whispers now, you've done just fine. By now, the fire has been lit, more for ambience than warmth, and its flames dance lazily in the grate, reflecting off crystal glasses and polished shoes now slightly scuffed from damp terrain. You're curled on the same chaise, blanket over your lap, hair let down just enough to suggest you're off duty, but not enough to invite vulnerability. Because the final act of this entire day isn't indulgence or reflection, it's the thank you note. You sigh, not unhappily. There's a small stack of stationery on the table beside you. Ivory with scalloped edges, faintly perfumed, monogrammed just enough. A quill has already been placed in the inkwell, as if the very air expected your gratitude. In the 18th century, sending a thank you note after a noble picnic wasn't optional. It was sacred. The right phrasing could strengthen alliances, open doors, or soften the memory of a failed poem. The wrong one, you might not be invited next season. Mainstream etiquette guides were terrifyingly specific. The opening line had to mention the host's chosen theme. Your orchard of afternoon delight was a triumph, followed by a nod to something everyone noticed, the swan, and finally, a personal moment, the fig, the flirtation, the nap. You had to be sincere, just not too sincere. Warm but not cloying. Informative but not competitive. You begin. My dearest madam, your meadow, most graciously lent to the breeze and the bees, offered a feast not only for the appetite but for the imagination. You pause, consider, Then continue with a careful mention of the plum-glazed duck, surprisingly reflective. The music, off-key, but admirably brave. And the cleverness of placing the cordial table beside the rosemary bush. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some guests employed thank you ghostwriters, professional flatterers who specialized in composing just the right mix of wit and appreciation. These services were costly but effective. One duchess reportedly kept an entire team for events of over 10 guests. You finish your note with flourish, sealing it with wax and pressing a tiny sprig of thyme into the seal. Personal, memorable, not overly scented. But you don't stop there. You pen a second note, a shorter one, to the servant who adjusted your parasol just before the storm. It won't be delivered formally, but slipped quietly into the laundry bundle, where it will be found and perhaps smiled at. Historians still argue whether these notes were truly heartfelt or merely social armor. Some see them as performative echoes of a life lived on stage. Others believe they held genuine power, small gestures with long shadows. You write one last line, private one, not to the host, nor to a servant, but to the marquis at a folded slip of paper, tucked between the pages of the picnic program, and signed, just enough to be found or missed. Either outcome is the point. You lean back, the ink still drying beside you. Thank yous written. Messages sent. The performance is nearly done, and all that's left is to be remembered well. The next morning arrives like a silk curtain being slowly drawn across a window, light filtering in gently, one ray at a time. You stir in your chamber, limbs pleasantly sore from the prior day's orchestrated leisure. Your hair still carries the scent of lavender fields and lemon custard. You stretch, and you do what every noble soul does after a well-attended picnic. You listen. Not to the birds, though they're chirping their usual gossip. You're listening for whispers, near and far, across salons, corridors, and the minds of those who were definitely watching. It's time for the garden gossip aftermath. You don a robe, step into your slippers, and make your way toward the breakfast room, where letters lie in a polite stack and the staff are humming just a little too knowingly. You're not the first to rise. Your housemate, or perhaps your cousin, depending on the decade, greets you with raised eyebrows and a folded fan, even though it's indoors. Well, they say, just that, and you both smile, because everyone knows that well contains multitudes. Mainstream letters and personal diaries from the 18th century often reveal this day after ritual. While the picnic was performance, the next morning was judgment. Not cruel, not always, but deeply, intimately diagnostic. Whose parasol collapsed, whose tart was too ambitious, who lingered just a bit too long by the pear tray. You unfold your letter, hand-delivered, sealed in plum wax, anonymous but unmistakably from the marquis. 2 lines. One compliment, one inside joke. Nothing explicit, everything implied. You smirk. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some noble households engaged in reputation mapping, where family members gathered after every social event to track gossip vectors, who was rising in favor, who had embarrassed themselves, and which whispered alliances might form future engagements. It was like military strategy, but with lace. You nibble on a piece of toast and sip lukewarm tea, the kind made slightly bitter by scandal. Across the table, someone mentions the peacock's name had actually been Claude, not Celestine. This changes everything. You hear someone else refer to the poem contest as brave, a devastating word. Worse than bold. Certainly worse than original. You're grateful no one used it about your verse. Yet, historians still debate the cultural function of post-picnic gossip. Some say it reinforced social cohesion through shared storytelling. Others claim it served as a pressure valve, a way to gently punish poor performance without official consequence. Outside, a servant tends to the garden. You watch them scatter breadcrumbs across the lawn as a swan glides into view. You wonder if it remembers. You wonder if you do, and then you fold the letter, slip it into your journal, and smile, because if the meadow was the stage and the basket the script, this is the review. And you, dear reader, you got 5 stars. Afternoon now, and the house has returned to its usual rhythm. A quiet hum of footsteps down hallways, teacups set just so, and the occasional distant clatter that suggests something broke, but not something important. You, however, are not quite ready to let go. You've returned to your writing desk, the same one where you penned your thank you earlier. The ink blotter has dried. The scent of yesterday's meadow still clings faintly to your gloves. There's one last ritual to complete. The memory inventoried. It's not formal, not public, but it is deliberate. You open your linen-bound notebook, soft from wear, edges slightly foxed, and begin jotting in looping script the pieces of the day that must be preserved. Not just events, moments, glimmers, suspended absurdities. The marquis's eyebrow when the peacock preened mid-sonnet. Lavender jelly on silk cuff, irreparable but poetic. The way thunder made everyone turn at once, like choreography. Mainstream practices show us that many nobles kept picnic journals, not for posterity or history, but for personal theater. A way to remember where you stood in the meadow, who passed you cherries, which parasol tilted when the wind turned warm. You write, slowly, tenderly, as if pressing the ink into time itself. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some families passed these journals down, building generations of picnic lore. Daughters would read of their mothers' flirtations beside lemon groves. Grandsons would chuckle at ancestral quips scribbled in margins. Do not trust a man who praises salad too early. You write a line you hadn't meant to. It was almost too beautiful to be real. And then, on a whim, you sketch the meadow's layout from memory. The trees, the blankets, the table with the fan-folded napkins, the spot where the musician's hat blew off, where you dozed just long enough to dream of swans speaking Latin. Historians still debate whether such personal documentation was for reflection or control. Some argue it was to immortalize perfection. Others suspect it was insurance against forgetting who you were supposed to have been. You set the pen down. The room is quiet. In the silence, you hear yesterday again, not the words but the mood, the way the grass folded beneath your weight, the warmth of a fig in your palm, the silence shared between strangers bound only by the rules of pretend. You close the book. Not with finality. Just gently. Because some pages are never done. Only paused, and the picnic, though technically over, now lives forever in the folds of that paper, and maybe in the stain on your hem, and certainly in the letter tucked, still unread, behind the mirror. Evening unfurls with a hush, like a curtain lowering over a stage that's finally, fully emptied. You've changed into something softer. Linen with a faint lavender scent, sleeves loose, mind looser. Candles glow low along the mantel, their wax forming lazy spirals like the day's final thoughts. Outside, the last light slips behind the orchard, staining the sky a buttery gray. Even the birds seem to be whispering now. It's time to let it go. Not forever, but just enough to sleep. You settle into your armchair, the one by the window. The room smells of tea and faint rain. You cradle a blanket that still bears a trace of yesterday's grass. Folded, but not shaken clean. Let it stay. You let your thoughts drift backward, not sharply, but in meanders. There was the flute solo that nearly made you laugh. The swan that chose no one. The tart so beautiful you hesitated to eat it, then did. The marquis. The glance. The figure you did weld. No ruined lace. No dropped spoon. No verses regretted, at least not out loud. And best of all, you noticed it. All of it. The invisible choreography of parasols, the quiet rebellion of the cherry stem toss, the honeycomb passed under a napkin like a dare. Here's your final quirky tidbit. Some guests commissioned watercolor recreations of their picnic moments. Not of the people, but of the food, the tree shadows, the blanket folds. One famously included a wasp mid-flight, captioned, "The True Critic." Historians still debate whether picnics were escapism or theater, indulgence or discipline. But you know the truth now. They were dreams. Wide awake, wide-brimmed, lightly buttered dreams. And yours? Yours was complete. You rise once more, this time for real. One candle left flickering. You blow it out slowly. The scent of warm wax and a hint of thyme curls into the room like a benediction. You slip into bed. The linen's cool at first, then familiar. You close your eyes, and somewhere, a peacock rustles in its sleep. The night has settled now. The rain has passed. The house is still. Let your breath come slower. Let your shoulders sink, your jaw release. Your hands grow soft and empty. There's nothing left to hold right now. Just memories curling gently at the edges, soft ribbons of laughter, the dappled sun beneath tall trees, the hush of fans fluttering in rhythm with the wind, the smell of bread, the glisten of figs, the feel of grass just damp enough to remind you the world is real, that it was only a picnic. But wasn't it everything? Now the meadow is quiet, the guests have gone. The baskets are packed, the carriages vanished, the music long faded into the folds of the afternoon. But you are still here, and in the space where the clink of glass once was, where the napkin was folded just so, there is only peace now. You can rest. You should rest. Because no one is watching. Anymore. The swans are sleeping. The fig has been eaten. The grape's message, whatever it meant, can wait until morning, so breathe in. Let the story fade like sunlight on silk, and breathe out, slowly, deeply, again. You are safe now, and the dream is done.